Welcome back to National Report. We're 5 days away from the election, and as we've discussed this week, there are now more millennials and Gen Zers and people under the age of 40 who are eligible to vote than the number of baby boomers. Now, it's often assumed that the younger generations will automatically lean towards the Democratic vote, but of course, that's not the case for all young voters. Joining us to discuss, we welcome Nate Hochman, a senior at Colorado College. Also, our panel of the day is standing by, Jack and Vic. Nate, before we get started here, I want to run through some numbers on these past presidential elections where Republican candidates actually did pretty well with the youth vote. According to the Roper Center at Cornell University, in the 1984 election, Ronald Reagan won the youth vote 61%, and then we see in 1988, George H.W. Bush, 53% of the vote. Now I'll show you this. It's a poll conducted by CNN. Joe Biden comes in 68% among young voters between the age of 18 and 34. President Trump trailing behind at 30%. Nate, when you see these numbers, how do you make sense of them?
Well, I think, first of all, it's worth pointing out that, as you said, the youth vote is not necessarily a done deal for Democrats. There's a sort of narrative that I think people both on the left and the right share about young people being uniformly more liberal or uniformly more democratic. And that's not the case. It's in relatively recent history, you have had Republicans who are capable of winning the majority of the youth vote. The problem is that young people are idealistic, they're positive, they're optimistic, they like a forward-facing message. And where the Republican Party is right now, on that messaging is not where it needs to be. So it's the Republican Party of Trump is very different from the optimistic, forward-looking, optimistic, conservatism of Ronald Reagan. And that's why I think you see Donald Trump and his party writ large being really, really significantly losing the youth vote to Biden and the Democrats.
Well, break it down for me, because you're on a college campus right now, or maybe you're doing some sort of virtual learning. I guess I'm not technically sure about that, but you'd be familiar with college-age students. Maybe perhaps you've talked to some members of college Republicans or college Democrats as well. And when you look at the two groups, is there one that might be more hesitant to speak out or publicly show which candidate they would be supporting on a college campus?
Yeah, obviously supporting the president is really, really controversial, and especially on college campuses. It's never been easy to be a conservative on a college campus, but in our current political environment, a lot of conservatives just aren't interested in speaking up. But with that being said, young people in my generation particularly are more pro-life, actually, by polling than older generations were at their age, and they're more pro-gun rights. So there are interesting currents in my generation that actually seem to be moving right rather than left. And Republicans need to see that and need to figure out how to make inroads into our generation, because even though it's very controversial to support the president, and the president is deeply unpopular with my generation, that doesn't mean that my generation is just completely liberal. It's quite the opposite, in fact.
Yeah, really interesting there. Obviously, it's Trump who's up for re-election this November, so it could be interesting to see how the future of the Republican Party looks.